The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. Still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, my group would just jump in and help out. It was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha, everybody. I am geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont from HVERI, the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute. And we also have Carrie Kaufman and Dano Kaufman, our ASL interpreters, back with us once again. Appreciate you guys being back. Today is Thursday, February 29th, 2024. It's a leap year, Dane. How are you today?
Doing pretty good, looking forward to what we have lined up today. It's always fun going back and looking at some of the old eruptions of decades past. So looking forward to that. And yeah, at least we're not stressed about the volcano right now.
Right. The volcano has been pretty quiet. It's a little bit light on the monitoring data this week. So we'll go through that maybe a little more quickly than usual. And then we'll pay some attention to the February 28th, 1955 eruption, the Lower East Rift Zone eruption in Puna down there that was partly covered by 2018 eruption. So it's been going on 6 years now for 2018. This is something we talked about at the beginning of the 2018 eruption. But it's time to revisit it now, right? All the activity is far from there. It's all in the Southwest Rift. There's no imminent danger. It might have been a little too soon to talk 55, considering we're still recovering from 18, but I think now is the right moment to come back and revisit this. So 69 years since that eruption. And we'll get into that at the end of our update here.
Yeah, and if anybody has any questions, anything like that, go ahead and put it in the chat, and we'll still do the Q&A at the end, or try to. We'll see how we're doing.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, Dane, and yeah,
Yep.
thanks for taking care of that. So let's switch our screens around here and get ready for our summary. Let me get us switched over here and put up our summary. Okay. So in our Hawaiian volcano summary for this week, Kilauea has been pretty quiet. Earthquake rates have decreased even further from last week, as you can see here at the right end of this graph. It's been just about a month. The end of January was the big spike in activity, earthquakes, and the big pulse of intrusion down the southwest rift of Kilauea. And since then, it's come down first quite a bit, and then a little bit more, and a little bit more. And here we are at close to background levels again, although not quite. Not quite. If you look at the earthquake map this week, here it is, our activity. I'll zoom it in. This is colored by depth. So you see the oranges and reds are the closest to the surface. And there's still some activity down the southwest rift pathway that was intruded, and a little bit of earthquakes as well, just off to the south, presumably because this whole Kauai fault zone area is still adjusting and moving seaward in response to that gathering magma. So most of the magma has been injected already, but it can, there's gravity, there's a big crack, the crack's moving, the ground's moving. So there could be more space created, and that can allow the magma to settle and keep adjusting a little bit. And that's what we're basically seeing. Is if we look at the summit itself has been in an inflationary trend for the most part, with deflation inflation cycle superimposed upon it. And that's been a pattern for most of this last month here since that intrusion. But over the last week, it's been much more subtle. It's been close to constant with those variations. And that's at the summit. If we look at the GPS station down at Elemakule, which is down on the southwest coast, KULE station here, we can see that, especially in this north-south component over here on the right, that it had been moving south already, but it seems to have sped up, especially in the last week, perhaps 2 weeks here. So this is the strongest signal this last week, and it's all the way down at the southwest flank of the volcano, which still suggests that there's still adjustment ongoing in that part of the volcano, and maybe that's helping relieve the pressure from the summit a little bit. So pretty slow, pretty quiet, perhaps because it's still adjusting. It's basically still wrapping up that last sequence. It hasn't all locked into place. Everything hasn't stopped moving yet. So that's the summary for Kilauea. And for Mauna Loa, we'll just show this plot, earthquake rates for the past 5 years, earthquakes per month. So this was a buildup to our eruption at the end of 2022. And here we are in early 2024, where all of 2023 as well was pretty quiet. And here we are, even more quiet than usual. And once again, perhaps the motion of Kilauea's southwest flank also affects Mauna Loa's southwest or southeast flank. That then can be relieve the pressure and quake a little bit less as well. So the more the rocks move out of the way, the less pressure can build, even if magma is filling up, and that can cause less earthquakes. And that might be what we're seeing on both Mauna Loa and Kilauea. That's our summary for this week. So let me switch us on to some observations. And we have our usual webcams to go through. I thought I'd just show you a few. We're still seeing heat from below the crust at Halemaumau. But looking at the visible image, not much has changed up there. We have an image from Martin Kelkel on Twitter, who has compiled the Sentinel data here and made a time lapse from 2017 until present of Kilauea summit area. Let's see if it'll play. There it goes. So at the beginning here, you see the outline of that overflowing lava lake. There is a collapse pit. For some reason, X is hanging on me today, but maybe you can see this well enough. There's a water lake coming up, and here comes several pads of lava. There, and a little bit more, and a little bit more, a little more, There. That's where we are today. So, all right, let's hang a little bit. Let's move it on. We'll look at our earthquakes next. And here is a map of earthquakes on the island. And you see, as usual, our concentration is here in the southeast. Mauna Loa is quite quiet. We have some background events elsewhere on the island, but nothing really that concerning. That's all normal for the volcano, for all of the volcanoes and for the island. If we look closer on Kilauea, these plots are, these earthquakes are colored by time, so it's hard to distinguish exactly what's going on. So I'll move it on now to the HVO webpage map, which this is now showing the last 2 weeks. And I'm going to show you what the difference is here. If I go to the settings and let's plot the earth, let's see, settings, and let's color them by time. So here's what it looks like colored by time. All blends together. And by depth, you see that we have now the blue ones are deeper and the red ones are shallower. And it tells us that these earthquakes are not the same thing. They're two different things happening on the same map space here at different depths. So adjustments still happening down here in the Pahala zone, deep, deep down, as magma comes through that hotspot feeder. And closer to the surface, it's really tailed off here, although there is activity over the last 2 weeks here in this pathway up through here. If I come up to the earthquake filters, and let's do last 2 days only, you can see how few earthquakes there actually are. Still ongoing at depth over in the Pahala zone, but as far as the shallow stuff plotted in red and orange, not a whole lot. You see the pathway would have been here, so you can expect adjustments anywhere oceanwards from here. The red ones likely right next to that dike, and these orange ones are more typical of the south flank, so that whole thing might get pushed as well as all the pressure builds from the summit towards the ocean there. And that's the earthquake summary. It's not a whole lot of earthquakes on the map, so we'll go on to our monitoring segment next. And we'll start off with our text update. So we'll just read today's update, some highlights, which is not a whole lot of news. There's low rates of earthquakes at the summit and along the Kauai fault system. And that's basically it. They report 8 earthquakes over the past 24 hours, or there are times where reported more than 100. So it's really come down quite a lot. That's what you see in the graphs. Our gas emission rate is still about 100 tons per day of SO2. So that's unchanged as well. And all the rift zone observations are also unchanged. So there's really not a lot of news in here. It's just telling us everything is still quiet. That's the bottom line with this update. So looking at some of our plots, here is a tilt for the last week. And we have really not gained anything in net from start to finish from the week. We've gone through deflation, inflation, deflation. So these cycles, due to magma movement in the near surface underground, but no net gain of inflation here. Earthquakes have been pretty steady. This is zoomed in, so 60 to 50 to 30 earthquakes per day here, but pretty normal. And in normal depths as well. The pattern is pretty typical what we see. And a map, we've looked at that already. So looking at the last month, there is that month-long plot at Uekahuna at the summit by Halemaumau. And this entire blue line is very similar to the one at the Sand Hill Station. It's just squished down, it's compressed, because the scale over here is much larger. And we're capturing this big motion of the intrusion and the deflation since. So the volcano lost quite a lot of pressure, right? That vertical height. We're all the way up here, and now we're all the way down here. So even if we keep inflating, as we generally have over the past couple weeks, it'll still take some time to rebuild to that level of pressure. There's quite a lot of work to recover here. Still, it does look like, if we zoom in here, that both this green line, which is the component that faces that southwest rift connector at the edge of the caldera that feeds in the southwest rift, and Halemaumau, the blue line, they both seem to be trending together, right? So one Halemaumau is going down, we're seeing the South Caldera go down as well. When it's going up, they're going up as well. So they seem to be in sync and well connected, and both of them deflating slightly now as we see the southwest flank continuing to adjust. So depth versus time patterns are still normal on that one. I'll just move it quickly through there and just show this one once again, how dramatic the drop-off has been over the last month here. Earthquakes per day over the last month. When we look at the 1 year plot, we now look at earthquakes per week. And so there is our spike at the end of January. And you see it more compressed here, down, down, down. For the last 5 years, we now go per month. And in that time scale, you don't see much difference and much variation from month to month here. So we'll keep an eye on this as time moves forward. On our GPS, at the summit's expanding north to south still. That's what's normally been doing. That continues, not a whole lot of change from last week. On an east rift at Pu'o'o, a similar pattern, not a lot of change from last week either. But we can go to our 2-year GPS plots and look a little more closely. So these are the summit stations, northwest at Uekahuna. Similar patterns as you've seen. And in fact, you might argue there's hardly any change at all over the last week here among all this noise and data here. So that's about the same. Byron's Ledge is about the same. No major turnarounds. We did see it turn from moving south to north last week, but that pattern is still moving north, continuing. And the summary really is everything is about the same as it was last week, right? Not moving up or down, but kind of staying the same. There's another one, not moving up or down, staying the same. So as I mentioned before, that's the pattern across most of the volcano. There's a little bit of difference if you start looking at the Kauai fault zone area, Ahua, which is a station just to the south. Looks like it might be showing a little bit of a drop there. And Puhimau also, maybe, it's hard to tell within the noise there, but there could be other little adjustments happening as well, and we'll need more data to see what the effects actually are. But as I pointed out in our summary at the start, it's really the Ilemakule station over here. And let's flip the screen around here. So Ilemakule is a station we're looking at. And what I'll do is put us over to Google Earth so you can see where this is. I won't go through all the stations, but here is our earthquake swarm. And there's that pattern that flares off to the south. Ilemakule is this one right there. Uh-oh, what happened? Okay, there it is. So that's the one that we were zoomed in on, showing this faster rate of southward motion, especially. Right, the east-west motion, the one data point, but it's hard to tell much difference there. And the up and down motion, all within the noise as well. It's really most convincing here in a north-south movement. So this station here, getting pushed faster to the south, right? So what's north of it? It's that zone right there. This is likely where the magma is still gathering and adjusting a little bit to cause this piece of land right here to be the one that moved the most this past week. And that's why we say that the final stages of that intrusion adjustment must still be ongoing here. Okay, so that's the monitoring signals there for Kilauea this week. That's really the most interesting thing besides what's going on, which is not a whole lot of, not much else. We will, of course, check in on our gas from the national park because that's the main volcanic hazard our community faces at this point. And if you're in a nearby community like Volcano Village or visiting a national park, you may have exposure. Whereas everything is in the green now, some people can be more sensitive to those conditions. And so just watch for the signage and be proactive if you have any respiratory issues here. Even at low levels, this can be a nuisance for people or more problematic than that. So all good on the hazards. That's basically background for the volcano. And finally, we'll talk about Mauna Loa a little bit. So we started off with our 5-year plot at the beginning. Let me make the screen say Mauna Loa here. And there's our tilt for the last week. We're so zoomed in that we're looking at decimals of microradians. So we see the variation of the daily changes. What really matters is a long-term pattern, like a slight down here. Right? So slight deflation, and that's probably because of that movement of the flank in relation to Kilauea. Very few earthquakes on a depth time. Here is the last month. You don't see much because that earthquake we had on the 9th really jolted the instrument. But you can see it's basically flat, no major changes, nothing coming to the surface here. All right, so earthquake rates for the last month. Per day, the maximum was 7. Very, very few earthquakes. Over the last year, we're very low still. This was the deep swarm, so not even anything shallow. And as we started off our summary, this is the real summary image that shows how low earthquakes have been ever since the 2022 eruption, and still decreasing, in fact, here. So all quiet Mauna Loa, which is still filling with magma, but as we suspect, this southeast flank over here is able to move now that the doorstop of the southwest flank of Kilauea is moving as well, and the combination can then make more space underground for the magma to collect and not have to pressurize as much. So that is really the full volcano summary. We will jump a little out of order today, and we'll go to our community corner first right now because this might fit better here. And while we're talking about the national park, talk about some of the park news. So news release a couple of days ago for the whole national park system, 326 million visits last year. And of those, 1.6 million people visiting national park in 2023. 3 eruptions in 2023. It must have been a pretty busy year, but that's a big number, of course, for sure. So that's an increase in a national park at Hawaii volcanoes of 2.5% from 2022, and an increase of 27.5% from 2008, which was when the 10-year eruption of Hale magma began. Now, 2008, even though the eruption actually began there at the crater, you couldn't really see the lava in 2008. It was really 2009 and 10 where you could first see it, see the glow and all of that. So 2008 was a pretty slow year, relatively speaking, up there. So, of course, this park release says more than that. They mention the construction project that's ongoing, how they've lost some of the parking lots. And so all of this means more congestion for the next couple of years in the national park, unfortunately. Visitation is going up, activity has been going up, but the places to park have been going down, unfortunately. And that's why they're going through these upgrades. So that's the visitation update from the national park. We can naturally follow to the construction updates here. So the construction schedule, we still have partial closure of Uekahuna at the previous Jagger Museum over here, for long vehicles especially. Today, the 29th, there's been a section of the entrance lane to the national park that's been temporarily closed for communication line work. Maybe pretty minor, just one day. The big one is this one. From March 4th, 2024, closure of the paved parking area east of the visitor center, adjacent to the Crater Rim Drive, and the entire gravel overflow lot. This impacts about 32 spaces. So that is the crunch that's being faced here. Yeah, so even without any eruption, just with the regular ebb and flow of the seasons, it can be getting pretty busy up there, and plan accordingly, right? And as we mentioned last week, they are taking input on the congestion. So if you have comments on that, you can go online and submit them for the next month as well. While we're talking construction, it's worth noting that the Kilauea Recovery has put out an update this month in February with a new timeline, right? So people often ask, and we just have to follow the updates that are provided. The newest thing is this: Highway 137 from Four Corners to Pohoiki Road. That's the road and water line. They're in the final stages of reviewing documents and releasing a bid package in February. Today's the last day, so maybe that happened. We'll see. With an estimated 90 days for bid, reception, review, award, and contract. And thus, construction scheduled to begin in the second quarter of 2024. Maybe towards the end of the second quarter at this rate if it's 90 days, right? But still, that's the idea. That's the first thing to look forward to in a few months here. And everything else is slightly behind that, right? They have timelines coming out through here, and we can go through more of this coming up. But that's the important take-home message, is that first part is going to be Four Corners to Pohoiki, second quarter of 2024. More on that as it gets closer to. Okay, so a couple other events to note. This is not this coming weekend, but next weekend, March the 9th, in Pahoa, there is a revitalized Puna event put on by the County of Hawaii, featuring the Puna Food Summit, all kinds of stuff happening there, infrastructure updates, agriculture resources, plant giveaways, free lunch and keiki fun. So that's all happening in Pahoa, 10 to 2 p.m. Dane, I believe, will be there. So you can go look for him at that point if you'd like to talk story with us in person, since that can always be fun as well. So that's happening in the south part of the island. That same day, March 9th, at the north end of the island, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. This is put on by the Kohala Resilience Hub. This is near the Kamehameha Park, the Kamehameha statue, not too far from Hawi. Having resilience fair, giveaway, partners, food vendors as well. Right, that's a Ohana Fun Day. So archery, they'll have a rock climbing wall, free lunch and food as well. Or I guess food vendors, maybe not free over here. Food vendors as well. And I believe the pool is going to be open as well if people are going to be in the area. So on March 9th, we will be split north and south across island. And if you're anywhere on island and want to come find us, that's where we'll be. Supporting our resilience of our communities here island-wide. So that is the community update. And maybe at this point, Dane, if there's any questions about what's going on currently, we can look at it. But otherwise, I can get into 1955 next.
We did have one come through. We can take a look at that one. Oh, did I not highlight it? 1 second, right here. It's from our friend Nathan, who asks about Pu'u'o, essentially. If I'm not mistaken, the Pu'u'o eruption created that lava flow that flowed for 35 years. Anyhow, do you think that could occur again, and what would need to start at Pu'u'o again?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a couple of things. I mean, there's a couple of things in play there. One is, what does it take for lava to reestablish into the Middle East Rift to actually erupt? And that's part A, because that's where that eruption began to flow downhill to the ocean. And part B is, could it last that long where lava flow to the ocean is fairly reliable? That was some of the magic of the Kalapana era, the Kalapana lava flow era. It was pretty reliable and pretty constant down there. So to answer whether it might come out of Pu'u'o itself, that is just a weak spot in the ground, but it's also been plugged with rock falls and magma and all kinds of stuff happening. Typically, you don't see exactly the same pipeline get reoccupied after a significant amount of time. Sure, it could happen, but a lot of times what you have is rock that's lost more of its gas, and for that reason, it's more solid and harder to break. And so when a magma is pushing upwards against all this bulk of rock, it'll find the weakest spot to break through, and it's quite often not the exact same spot because that's been plugged up. So it comes up near there, but it might be a little more to the north or a little more to the south. And in fact, that's why we call this whole area rift zone, because it can have that half-mile play on the surface one way or the other, and just find the easiest path anywhere in that whole zone, right? Rather than it has to come up in this one particular lineation, the one crack. So yeah, those are the elements of it. We don't see magma coming into the Middle East Rift yet. We see it coming into the Kilauea this year, end of last year, which is the prerequisite for it to go in the East Rift Zone. So we're getting close to that possibly happening. Most eruptions on the East Rift before Pu'u'o, and with the exception of Mauna Loa, which also lasted 5 years, most of those don't make it to the ocean. And maybe that's where I'm trying to get at, Nathan, is that most of these short eruptions in the Rift Zone, you can get lots of them happening. Not going to go back in the Rift Zone. You can have little eruptions there, but they're not likely to get to the ocean unless they stay parked there for years and years and years and years. And for that, that's all a matter of South Flank and the Rift Zone actually opening, right? So the South Flank is getting pushed a little bit because of this earthquake swarm last month. All the blocks are rotating around, and we'll have to just wait and see whether that actually opens a pathway and when that actually happens. So that's a great question. I don't have a solid answer, but that's the discussion we can offer of what the elements actually are around that. Right. Did I get it, Dane? Did I?
Yeah, I think so. We did have a quick question. I haven't seen it, but from Dennis asked a question about if you've seen figures on how much magma intruded into the Southwest Rift Zone. Any ideas been passed around yet?
There was one update that was 30 million cubic meters was the update. Right, and I don't know if I have a plot handy. Maybe I can find it here, but I made a plot of this somewhere. That's comparing the volumes of those. Here it is. Throw it up here. Make it bigger. Okay, so million cubic meters here on the left, and the number on the inside is how long it took in days, right? So this is 30 right here, and here's our last 3 eruptions. They were in a range of 10 to 16-ish, somewhere in there. So this intrusion we had more magma in that one injection than any of the last 3 eruptions we had, and it was closer in volume to the first eruption that refilled the crater back in late 2020, December 2020, the one that boiled away the water lake, right, and filled up the bottom of the crater super fast. This was more like that one than any of the other ones so far. So that's the answer.
All right.
Preliminary, of course. We'll have to wait for them to actually go through all of that, but that's what they wrote in the report. 30 million cubic meters or 40 million cubic yards.
Ballpark. Yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe it was 40. Yes. Yeah.
Cool. I think that does it for questions for right now, and we can go ahead and talk about some 1955 stuff.
All right, let's do it. So let's bring up our 1955 Kilauea Lower East Rift Zone eruption. And as I mentioned before, this is something that when I think back to the beginning of our updates, really, in 2018 in Lower Puna, this was the first thing we talked about, right? The very first few days of the eruption. It wasn't really on YouTube. It was in person with the people down at the hub. But the first thing I had was print out these maps and what could possibly happen. Well, here is a case study of what happened in 1955. And one of the early things we said was the patterns could repeat, and you should be prepared to be gone for up to 3 months, because that's how long that eruption actually lasted, 88 days.
Yeah.
And it began February 28th, 1955, and that's why we're doing this today.
Yeah, I remember the first week of the eruption, sitting down with the McDonald report from 1955 and trying to gain any information out of it about what might happen next during that eruption. That was the interesting thing, though, was also that we had 1955 magma return in the very beginning of that eruption, right? So it wasn't just the stuff that was stored in the rift zone came back to the surface. So we had that transition, essentially, and a direct connection to 1955 and 2018.
Yeah, and the patterns were actually quite similar as well, right? Because what happened in 55 was there had been an intrusion in 1924, and the magma that came out was also the old sticky magma from 24 that had been stored in there. And only at the very end did you get that hotter, fresher stuff as well. So this is a newspaper from the Star Bulletin, Honolulu. You can see some of the imagery from that day. Just thought I'd start off with that and see how big an event this was. It's made national news as well. Here's Life magazine from March 28th, 55. flaming lava licks at palm trees. There. So yeah, it was a big deal. I thought what I would do to start is we'll play you about a 10-minute video that is more of the visual candy, you know, more of like, you know, the produced video of the 55 eruption. So what I mean is, like, it's not the chronology. It's not like this is what happened and what order it happened. We'll go through that afterwards, coming up next. But to start, here is this video of a 55 eruption. And let me know if there's any issues with the sounding. Otherwise, here we go. Let's hope this works.
The 1955 eruption of Kilauea on the island of Hawaii was a flank eruption on the east rift zone of the volcano, about 20 miles east of the summit caldera. The outbreak was preceded by hundreds of earthquakes, some of which are here being recorded on a low magnification seismograph. Just before the outbreak, cracks opened in the ground as the rift zone was torn open. The formation of a new volcanic vent begins as fume pours from a crack. The fume is mostly a mixture of steam and sulfur oxides. Finally, a slowly expanding bulb of viscous lava appears. This bulb is only 3 or 4 inches across. As activity continues, a small spatter cone is built at the vent. This one is about 10 feet high. Showers of spatter falling on the side of the cone build it up. A closer view shows the rapidity with which the blobs of spatter striking the cone cool and darken. The cone built by this typical Hawaiian activity consists of thoroughly welded spatter. It is quite different from the cones of mostly loose cinder built by more explosive eruptions, such as characterize most continental volcanoes. Here, a lava flow has buried a small vent, and gas from the vent is bursting its way through the overlying, rather viscous lava. A small flow of pahoehoe, the smooth-surfaced or ropey-surfaced lava, issues from a row of spatter cones. The flow is about a foot thick at the edge. The smooth or billowy surfaces are much more characteristic of pahoehoe than is the ropey surface. These views illustrate well the typical mode of advance of one common variety of pahoehoe flow. Larger flows of pahoehoe are fed almost wholly internally through lava tubes. Here, the lava fountain at the vent has grown to a height of 250 feet. And in this spectacular group, the largest fountain is 800 feet high, a great jet of molten lava playing for hour after hour. During this period, the rate of lava extrusion was about 500,000 cubic yards per hour. The temperature in the core of this fountain, measured with an optical pyrometer, was between 1100 and 1120 degrees centigrade, or roughly 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Still another great lava fountain, 600 feet high, plays at the top of a cinder and pumice cone of its own building. And here you see a dark cloud of pumice blowing away from the fountain. This close view of the fountain, taken from the top of the cone, shows well the manner in which these cones are built. Fluid Hawaiian-type bombs striking the side of the cone kick up clouds of dust. Here, you are looking from the air into the crater of an active cinder cone. From a gap in the cone wall, a lava river, 25 to 50 feet wide, leads seaward, feeding the wide black margins and active front of an aa flow. Aa flows, in contrast to pahoehoe flows, are fed largely by open rivers. Near the vent, this river of very fluid-appearing lava, 12 feet wide, spilled from a broad pond at the base of the cone to feed another flow of aa. Although this lava appears very fluid, its viscosity actually is about 1,000 poises, or some 20,000 times that of water. Here, the river rushes down a slope of 30 degrees at a speed of about 35 miles an hour. On a gentler slope, it moves more slowly. A close view of the river. Again, the river plunges over a steep slope, dividing and reuniting like a braided river of water. The cascade is about 25 feet wide at the top. Clouds of volcanic fume and smoke drift across the surface of the river. Aa is the type of lava characterized by a very rough, clinkery surface. This typical aa flow front is about 10 feet high. The flames result from burning of vegetation being buried by the flow. The lava flow pours onto a paved road. Here it plunges over an 8-foot road cut, making a miniature lava fall onto the road. Note the bright incandescence of the lava, even in daylight. A glimpse of the flow front at close range. The flow moves on between piles of rubbish pushed up by bulldozers in clearing the land. The flow front averages 10 to 15 feet in height and is advancing about 1,000 feet per hour. It illustrates well the typical mode of advance of an aa flow. The flowage takes place in the internal, still mobile, pasty portion, visible here as the red part of the flow margin. The partly cool, black clinkery surface portion of the flow is merely rafted along on the mobile portion beneath. As they reach the flow front, many fragments of clinker roll down to be overridden by the advancing flow, resulting in a motion resembling that of the front of an endless track on a tractor. The lava plunges over a 50-foot sea cliff into the ocean, sending up great clouds of steam. Here, you see the steaming flow front in the ocean. And from it there rises a jet of black ash, a so-called littoral explosion, caused by the violent escape of steam where water has entered the very hot interior of the flow. Tails of steam follow the larger fragments. Much of the material is black sand-sized glassy ash that commonly washes up on shore to form black sand beaches. The steam cloud rises high above the boiling ocean. Boiling water, rolling clouds of steam, and many minor littoral explosions provide a spectacular climax to the course of the flow.
All right, Dane. What's your reaction?
You know, a lot of that stuff just looks a lot like 2018 until the beginnings of 2018, right? And then we got to the point in 2018 where we're like, is it still kind of looking like 1955? And then by the time Fissure 8 had reactivated, it's like we're in whole new territory now. Like soon afterwards, the comparisons to Mauna Loa flow started, right? And trying to figure out like how do we model this thing, because we don't have anything in modern history like this to really draw upon because it was so much bigger.
Yeah, for sure. The volumes, the amount coming out was something that didn't compare pretty close. But I think
otherwise,
if we look at the dynamics of like, if we look at 55 and we'll look at the pattern of how things unfolded next, and you'll see that the same elements are in play. It just actually, the hand played out a little differently in that case.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, but some of the imagery, right? Seeing the cinder cones with open sides and the lava rivers flowing miles away down to the ocean, that looks eerily similar, right? In fact, some of the footage there's lots of footage here that I'm kind of picking maybe the best since we don't have all the time in the world here, but lots of the shots of the cane fields or the landscapers just look so familiar to what we saw in 2018.
Right.
Very similar areas.
One of the differences is that the area was much less developed than it is now, such that roadways and access into areas was significantly harder. And even aerial getting flights out was more, a different challenge. And so a lot of 1955, there's just so much difficulty in compared to 2018, where it's happening right there and there's multiple roads to intersect it.
Well, I mean, yeah, well, I think actually something like 6 miles of road got covered in 1955. Right? So we had a lot more, but maybe 30. But that's still a lot. Kalapana got cut off twice during that eruption. As in fact, there are no new roads. In fact, there's less roads now than there were in 2018. There were less roads than there were in 55. So the same pinch points.
I guess where you're looking at, yeah.
Similar, very similar pinch points. And let's get into it a little bit first. What I thought I would do first is just give credit to the Center for the Study of Active Volcanoes, CSAVE, CSAVE. They're the ones who have been compiling a lot of this old footage and bringing it online. And what I thought I would do is just show you a quick soundless version here from these guys. Some of the eruption clips of what's happening there, right? So the video we just saw was something that was more to be shown in a national park, where it's for someone who's not really interested in the sequence so much, but just learning about volcanoes at a very, very basic level. And you gotta remember that at this point in time in the 50s, there was not a lot of footage anywhere of eruptions. So this was some of the stuff that was really being shared across the world at that point in time, right? So introducing lava to people, the dynamics of how it cools and how hot it is and what types of flows there are and that kind of thing. But there's also another video put out from which this is clipped, and I'll show more of it narrated here after we go through some of the maps. That does go through more of the sequence, and we see the reports from the actual scientists in charge. So here's just some more of the views of what was happening around this time in Puna. Just some more visuals, and you can see how similar that actually can look to what we saw in 2018.
Those puffs look suspicious, like it's about to go. And then that's probably the same one.
That's the Pahoa Kalapana Road, where the fish are across
Right.
the road, steaming first, and then lava, and fountain, and a spatter cone that ended up being 30 feet tall. They claim it's 75 at some point, but they maybe weren't. The reporter didn't get the number right, I don't think. Same clip of the lava going over that little road cut, the high bursts of fountains, lots of gas, lots of fallout. This was a little pit crater that formed and collapsed underneath one of the properties and grew overnight. We'll see it again. And yeah, so this is another one of these lava going down the roads. Lava seemed to be attracted to roads then too, Dane. Coming down those cane roads, and of course there was such a steep slope from that area down to the coast that's where they clocked that river going 35 miles an hour, was down that steepest part of the hill of the Pali. Ocean entries. So this was a long eruption, and in fact, we hear it described as if it was 3 separate eruptions, all back to back, as far as 3 different sequences of events that occurred. Not in the order that you necessarily predict or expect, but that's how it actually went down in that event. So there it is, C-save, and with the credits roll here for this short little clip. And I thought I'd show one more, and this I pulled from Big Island TV in their short clip, just some of these other views, 55, right? So pretty amazing how much footage there actually is. A lot of this is in color. Yeah, big fountains, lines of fissures, 24 fissures also in 1955 that opened up eventually. V-shaped fountains there.
And that was, I remember when we were sitting there in the beginning of 2018, and it's like, we're on Fissure 5, and then people would ask, well, how many does it get up to? Like, well, 55 had 24, and they just, like, their mind was blown type of thing. Like, we're on 3 or 4, where there could be 24 of these things? Yes, and they'll get worse.
And they counted them a little different too, right? So like in 55, they actually had like Fissure 8A and 8B and 8C and 8D and 8E. So they grouped a lot of those to actually get to 24. So that's interesting as well. So the USGS has this webpage that details this whole eruption in Lower Puna, with all kinds of information and maps and things like that. So we've covered some of it. I won't read through the whole article, but I'll highlight a few clips that are interesting, right? One thing to note is this followed 18 years of quiet on the volcano. 52 was when it reactivated, and by 55, it had started moving down to the rift zone. Maybe what I'll do is let me just jump forward to this map here. So this is a map from professional paper 1806. That's 200 years of magma transport in Hawaii, and it's just showing earthquakes before that event actually occurred. So the key thing to realize is, let me see if I can get it in even further, is there was a pair of earthquakes on March 30th, 1954. And this is almost a full year ahead of the eruption beginning. And this is in the Kalapana area. And it was a 6.2 followed by a 6.0 shortly afterwards, maybe the next day. And 2 big earthquakes over here on the side. And interestingly, this is the same area that we believe the 6.7 activated in 2018. And what it did in 2018 is it actually moved the south flank to open a rift zone pathway and allow magma to then move into the lower east rift zone. And this did a similar thing. It wasn't a 6.7, it was a 6.2 and 6.0. So combined, it's slightly smaller, right? And what happened was this allowed the rift zone to actually open and magma to then start moving slowly into the rift and pushing it from behind. What they found was the lava erupted was mostly from 1924, cold, sticky, viscous lava, especially at the beginning there. And it was pushed from behind by the hotter lava that was coming through this whole area. When eruption actually began down here, this was after a year-ish of buildup, and really the month of February was the most intense of all that, where there's earthquakes being tracked all across there. In fact, after this event, in late March 54, that's when USGS goes and installs a seismometer in Pahoa in April 54. And that seismometer is the one that catches all these earthquakes for the next 10 months or so, building up to this event. So the pressure builds. It begins down here, Hawaiian area. We'll go through the sequence of the details of the lava coming out soon. But when this erupted, the summit was still inflating, actually. Right, the summit was not all the way communicating with this lower east rift. So it was inflating, the crack opens up, and after several days, we start to see the summit start to sag. And as the summit sags, magma is going from the summit into the Middle East rift, and there was an extra swarm of earthquakes around Kilauea from March 5th to 6th, 55. So this is about 1 week after the eruption began. There were earthquakes, swarms in this Middle East rift area, right? The south flank opening, magma coming down, injecting this area, causing earthquakes, pushing things out this way, and flushing 24 lava out at the bottom. That's how it all starts. And then the eruption migrates back up rift, and that's where it gets a little bit messy and diverges a little bit from what we saw in 2018. But that's the prequel for it, so to speak. Look at some more maps. Here are the different areas that erupted. Just so you know the names, Kapoa Crater is all the way over here. But Halekamahina is this area. Pu'uhonuaula is this one. Pu'ukaliu is this one. And I'ilewa all the way over here. Right, so the ones that made the ocean entries are down here. Those were mostly from the I'ilewa complex and Kaliu as well, right? So, and the ocean entries, they span from Kahina in the west all the way to Kaualeao in the east. I'm sorry about that name there. Kaualeao. Fortunately, it's on the screen here. And we also had that Ke'e flow in the middle there as well. So that's what the names are. I can show you the sequence. Here's another map showing the sequence. That's 1, that's 2, 3. 3 came back this way as well. 4, little pad by Kapoho Town. Then a pause. And 5 starts over here. 6, up rift. 7 wiggles back over here. And then another. And the last phase was all this stuff over here from I'ilewa, that went down to the ocean. So that's the layout of the land. That first phase, February 28th to March 1st, and that's around Pohuiki Road. Here's an image of that. Let's move it. No, can go forward. Pohuiki Road. You can see some of the vehicles down here. People along the road. And there is the fissure line right there. 2 segments of the fissure, Pohuiki Road.
You know, the only thing that makes it stand out to me being 1955 versus, 2018 is the lack of albizia trees. Yeah,
true.
Right. It's like, wow, that's an ohia forest. That wasn't on Pohuiki Road like that.
Right. So that's that phase right there. It said it began at Honuaula, east of Pohuiki Road, and they started going eastwards. The curtain of lava, with about 40 feet high, fed a flow that blocked that road. Fishers then went towards Kapoho 3 miles away, and they evacuated Kapoho and put them in shelter at the Pahoa School. And that was the first 2 days there, 28th and March 1st of 55. The second phase, March 2nd, a school bus driver discovered a widening crack across the road 2 miles west of Kapoho. lots of earthquakes, and fissures started spreading northeastward to less than a mile from Kapoho village. Then lava broke out near Hale Kamahina. That's a name we haven't warned anyone about there, Hale Kamahina. Right there, the house of the moon, maybe, in Hawaiian. Not exactly, but there is that area. Let's show you a picture of that, Hale Kamahina. This one, Hale Kamahina. There. This is where the Pahoa Kapoho Road came through.
Now that has some strong 2018 vibes to it. Not with the fissure that close, but that same angle we were looking at with Hale Kamahina there, the grasslands and the giant lava channel cutting through.
Yeah. So that's broke out near Hale Kamahina, then lengthened, causing a flow that blocked Pahoa Kapoho Road. And by evening, there were new vents and lines of fountains on both sides of the road. So it keeps going in that area. March 3rd, 4 new vents near Kapoho, 500 feet high. The next evening, the center of Kapoho, and lava all the way through the town, destroyed 3 houses. But a ridge of prehistoric spatter cones diverted lava northward away from the main part of town. This diversion will come up again. They saw how diversion was happening naturally, and they were encouraged to try it manually as well. This was the beginning of lava diversion here in this modern era. So the fountains in this area continued and coalesced into the Ki'i flow. That's the one that crossed the Kalapana Road just north of Ahalanui Beach Park and then stopped short of the ocean. So let me come back to the map. This one right here. Ki'i flow. So that was the second phase. The third phase, March 5th to April 7th, about a month. This was one of the major pulses there. Is when activity shifted back up the rift, all the way up to Honuaula. A new storm of earthquakes on March 5th. Civil defense evacuated all the way from Kalapana to Opihikau, leaving the Lower Puna coastline deserted. Plans were made to evacuate Pahoa if necessary. So it was March 12th that new series of earthquakes led to a new breakout, new vents, and the cracks opened across the Pahoa Kalapana Road. It started east of the road, came across the road, and went west of the road there. Let me pull the map back up just so you can follow along more easily. We're talking about this sequence down over here now. It started off over here, moves over this way, cuts across the road right there. Um, 400 feet high fountains afterwards. There was a farmer, Masayuki Nii, over there that had a fissure across their property. And that name will come up again when we show the last video here. And at this point, that flow, Kilauea flow, got all the way to the ocean in 39 hours. So that we got our first ocean entry. It happened pretty quick, but it was only 2 weeks into the eruption as well. And the flow only lasted 2 days. So that's kind of similar to the flow we saw in late May in 2018, where we had a breakout to the south and ocean entry that lasted 2 days at Mackenzie, near Mackenzie Park. So lava flows from that eruption had cut off all main roads leading to Kalapana. So then within this same phase, between March and 17th and 20th, new vents open up near Iiliva, west of that road. And that becomes the main source of eruption for the rest of the event. 700 feet tall fountains and new flow is going down slope. They noted an explosion near the Ni'i farm with black cloud shot ashward that day, and found a new pit crater 20 feet across and 50 to 100 feet deep, which had opened across a road from Mr. Ni'i's home. Then we saw the summit have earthquakes and began to sag and subside as magma moved into the rift. No major collapse. They estimate maybe half meter of sagging at the summit in 1955. And we had about 1,000 times more, 500 meters of collapse in 2018. So much larger drainage from the summit, and that's why the volume was also much larger in 2018. But they saw a little bit of that. It just didn't open the rift enough, and it didn't drain enough to go all the way, but it started to do that. On March 21st, those vents, western vents by I'ilewa, sent lava towards a group of houses, 8 houses and structure called Iwasaki Camp. So that's when they employed bulldozers to build barriers to divert the flow, and it worked to start, but eventually it didn't because the new fissure opened up across the barrier and still eventually got them. So 500-foot fountains at I'ilewa, Pele's hairs falling in Pahoa. On the same day, a new explosion from the pit crater sent a cloud of black ash to a height of about 1,000 feet. They inspected the pit. It had grown to 150 feet wide, and the depth had grown 150 feet deep, and the area 200 feet wide around the pit was beginning to sink inwards. The flow kept going down, threatened coffee fields of Yamada, more bulldozers, more diversions. But the flows went around the earth dikes and destroyed a lot of the farmland in the area. That Ke'e flow got to the ocean March 28th and stopped the next day. So another very short ocean entry there. And that would be the Ke'e right here. We mentioned this one. Now this one, then it's moving to the west still. So the vents at I'ilewa waxed and waned, made a new flow called the Kahina flow. And this flow destroyed cane fields, reached the ocean on April 2nd, and extended 1,200 feet into the ocean in front of the old sea cliff. So the Kahina flow is one you can still see today. If you're down on a Red Road area, you can see that old sea cliff and see the lava delta down below. So this is what happened.
There's a lot of other things you can see down at Kahina too. Not all of them good.
If that's the case, you're looking the wrong way. You gotta look at the lava flow. That's what I'm talking about here. So what's not, maybe not not the most eye-catching stuff, the black crumbly rock, but that's when I'm there. That's the objective.
Focus on that. Yeah. Just focus on that.
So the final phase was also at I'ilewa area, but it was almost like a reactivation because after April 8th, all the lava stopped coming out. Right? So the bulldozers reopened the road to Kalapana. Civil defense let everyone back into their homes on April 15th, 1 week after lava stopped. And 9 days later, a small outbreak of lava from one of the I'ilewa vents for a few hours and then stopped. 2 days later, sounds of escaping gas, another outbreak. And for the next 3 weeks, the vents kept doing this, throwing out cinder and spatter that formed 4 cinder cones about 100 feet high. So just a little pause here. In 2018, we saw reactivation in early September that lasted a few days. Then it was done, right? So here's a little diversion as well. Like in 2018, we spent most of that during the actual main eruption, and there wasn't as much tail end of it, right? And maybe because in 55, he didn't actually have that huge outpouring like 2018. It was able to have these secondary phases that came afterwards. Like, oh, now we're going to pressurize and work uprift this way. And that's why I had 3 different pulses, perhaps.
Also didn't have the collapses, the collapse explosion things. Deflation, yes, but collapse explosions. Yeah. That whole sequence, which did influence the surge at the fissure rate, essentially.
Would cause surges, yeah. I think most importantly, just a sheer volume, right? 1,000 times the volume just means 1,000 times the lava coming through, and that just messes, that's where all kinds of differences can occur. So for that last phase, lava kept coming downhill towards the Kalapana Road, but didn't actually cross the road. So residents were allowed to stay in their homes. with an understanding that observers would ring the church bell as an alarm if evacuation was warranted. That's the Starlink of the day, Dane, the church bell.
It works.
So, yeah, we've heard that even down in Seaview, they still use the conch shell, right? Because the audible alarm is sometimes the best one. So lava keeps ponding in between that E-lava area, and that spillover sent a big river down that threatened to sever the coastal road, but it ended on May 18th. And once again, another breakout on May 19th, another crack opened up, and that flow did eventually destroy the Iwasaki camp and then stagnate the next day. So kind of keeps going and going and going. May 26th is when tremor ends and lava stops coming out of the ground. So they follow what keeps happening there. So they monitor the area. They watch the blue gas flames at fissures near the farm, but there was no further lava. Right. So that's the summary of events. I'll skip this. I'll mention some of it as well. They do describe how the magma going downrift and uprift back and forth is irregular. Right, that's not something we saw in 2018, but that did happen here because of the delayed pulses coming through. They also talk about how the lavas were most differentiated in geology. This means that it sat there for a long time and grew crystals from 24, got sticky. That's what this means. And this is noteworthy. This was the first eruption in historic times to occur in any populous area in a U.S. territory. So this was a big exercise for people to be evacuated and for civil defense to actually start that whole cycle. So that's the USGS summary of that eruption in detail. And I wanted to make sure I touch on some of these details because when I play this movie, you'll recognize some of these areas and some of the names, and hopefully it goes together a little bit better for you guys. So there is that glowing pit across from the Ni'i farm. The Lava fountain from the side, that big stream going down to the ocean. And when that big ponded area broke and lava came flowing down, that's what this clip was from right there. So that's the background, and we'll finish it up here by playing you guys another narrated version of this 55 eruption. This is a 18-minute clip here, and then we'll wrap it up after that. So if we're ready, then here we go.
The 1955 eruption on the east drift zone of Kilauea Volcano in the eastern part of the Puna district was the first flank eruption of Kilauea since 1923, and the first eruption in eastern Puna since 1840. It had the aspects of three separate eruptions, each accompanied by its premonitory earthquakes. It was unusual in that the opening of the eruptive fissures in part progressed upslope toward the central vent of Kilauea crater, and also in the irregular manner in which activity shifted from one vent area to another. Two fissures, each about 300 feet long, emitting lava, extended from the Pohuiki Road into Field 114, playing from 50 to 150 feet high, with a sticky pahoehoe lava being emitted. This flow blocked the Pohuiki Road at 4:30 p.m. New eruptions, trending almost directly toward the village of Kapoho, 3 miles distant, started at 2:30 p.m. and again came on at 7:30 p.m. Lava flows from these advanced rapidly into the cane areas. Activity continued all night and suddenly stopped shortly after noon on March 1st, although steaming and fuming continued. Dr. Gordon MacDonald, volcanologist of the Hawaiian Observatory, comments as follows. Following the two big earthquakes near Kalapana on March 30th, 1954, the only seismic activity which persisted in East Puna issued from the East Rift Zone near Pahoa. Tiny, sharp, shallow earthquakes at an average rate of about 25 per month came from this region through the spring, summer, and fall of 1954. Late in the year, the frequency of these earthquakes began to increase. A total of 67 occurred in November, 81 in December, 185 in January 1955, and 350 between February 1 and February 23, 1955. On February 23, a sharp earthquake of moderate size occurred at a depth of about 25 kilometers under the East Rift Zone of Kilauea near Maka'opuhi Crater. After that date, the number of earthquakes coming from the East Rift Zone southeast of Pahoa rose sharply. Only 13 earthquakes from this region were recorded on February 23rd. This number increased rapidly to 130 on the 24th, 350 on the 25th, 600 on the 26th, and 700 on the 27th. Early on February 28, the frequency of earthquakes dropped off sharply, and at 7:45 a.m., the first harmonic tremor, heralding the beginning of a rapid flow of lava up through feeding channels, appeared on the Pahoa seismogram. The eruption had begun. On March 2nd, cracks appeared on the Kapoho Road and in the Canefield roads, with a sudden dropping of up to 3 feet in places. Cracks opened up even in the village of Kapoho, and at 2:15 p.m., lava appeared in fields 103 and 104 and in planters' fields. Activity continued until March 6th, with lava jets shooting up to a height of 1,000 feet at times. One source was just at the outskirts of Kapoho. The main flow from Pu'uki'i was deflected from the valley leading to Kapoho village by an old railroad grading. Although the lava piled up to a height of 15 to 20 feet above the level of the top of the grading, the lower mobile portion of the flow was deflected away from the village. The diversion caused by this grading stimulated renewed interest in the possibility of using lava dikes to divert the course of molten lava.
There's a little extra footage in here that they don't have narrated, but it's coming back in just a second here.
Some taller fountains than in 2018, huh? Not necessarily more voluminous, but taller.
This is how they're getting this aerial photograph with these kind of planes. And there are some stories I've heard. There's one in a book that I have, Dancing, Romancing with Pele by Gordon Morse. Tells a story of landing in this field on that airplane, coming across a woman barefoot.
After this series of eruptions, again activity ceased, but earthquakes continued, centering in the area between Pahoa and Kalapana, and becoming so frequent and intense that it was deemed advisable on March 11th to evacuate Kaualiao, Kamaili, Opihikau, and Kalapana, with detailed plans prepared for the evacuation of Pahoa. On March 12th, cracks appeared on the Kalapana Road, 3.5 miles from Pahoa, with one eruption. On March 13th, other cracks opened and eruptions took place progressively along a fissure 1/4 mile in length at Masayuki Knees, culminating in the destruction of Hayashi's home. Dr. McDonald's report on this series is very interesting.
On the evening of March 12, lava broke out near Pu'ukaliu, 2 miles east of the Kalapana Road. And on the morning of March 13, a series of outbreaks occurred just east of the road. Persons living in the area had already moved away, and the absence of any immediate threat to human life or movable property allowed us to spend a fascinating day watching and photographing for the first time in history the complete sequence of the development of new volcanic vents. First, hairline cracks opened in the ground, gradually widening to 2 or 3 inches. Then, from the crack, there poured out a cloud of white, choking sulfur dioxide fume. This was followed a few minutes later by the ejection of scattered tiny fragments of red-hot lava, and then the appearance at the surface of a small bulb of viscous molten lava. The bulb gradually swelled to a diameter of 1 to 1.5 feet and started to spread laterally to form a lava flow. From the top of the bulb, there developed a fountain of molten lava, which gradually built up around itself a cone of solidified spatter. The same general sequence was observed at 3 separate points during the day.
Just as the flow came down from the slope in front of Hayashi's. These are some of the best shots taken by anyone during the eruption. If you will note closely, you can see the cracks spreading across the road, then the wee bits of gas and fume coming out, then the further explosions of lava. Right now, the flow is coming down from Hayashi's front yard, crossing the road. This was the first flow to cross the Kalapana Road. You will note Dr. Eden making observations for his studies in volcanology. This shows the flow about 4 feet thick crossing the road. Here are the cracks, the little wisps of steam, sulfur dioxide gas, splitting the road. Gradually increasing in volume, then the darkening where the cinder gases start venting, followed by the building up of the small lava formations. This is Dr. McDonald of the Volcano Observatory staff. This was taken from in back of Hayashi's home and showing the several shots of the lava across from Ni's house. The entire area here is now just desolate. This shot shows that same road later in the afternoon. This picture was taken approximately 4 days later, where a cone of about 75 feet in height had built up in approximately 2 hours' time. On March 14th, the Kudo flow at Kilauea started, with lava 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit being emitted. These pictures were taken from a Murray airplane flying over the area, and notice the channel of lava coming down through the center of the picture. The lava from this flow was the first to enter the ocean, which it did 2 days later at Papaiki. The Kudo flow came down a very severe slope, covering the first half mile in approximately an hour's time. It completely cut 2 roads, giving access to the area. The old roundhouse at Kamaili was destroyed by a flow that evening. This is Bill Stearns, the pilot of the Murray airplane. The Kudo flow had 2 main fountains, each one shooting somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 feet into the air. A tremendous amount of lava came from these 2 main fissures. The night scenes of this were terrific. Those black dots, the flare in the middle of this particular picture is what was left of the old roundhouse at Kamaili as it was consumed by fire. The lava came down in channels approximately 20 to 40 feet in width and from 2 feet to 20 feet in depth. The black blots moving along in the flow varied in size from about the size of a basketball to the size of railroad cars. They seemed to float on the top of the lava river and then would crumble. They are formed by the cooling lava at the edges of the flow, breaking off, rolling over as does a snowball, and increasing its size that way. This is a shot from the Mauka side of the Kudo flow. The Kilauea series started on March 16th and continued until April 7th. Daily and sometimes continuous flows occurred during this period, with much of Kamaili being covered up to depths of about 50 feet. During this period, the Yamata flows occurred, one of them bypassing Iwasaki's house and entering the ocean. This shot was taken at the Kalapana Road, past the Kamaili Hill Road, and was the second flow to cross the Kalapana Road. This one shows lava itself in the background, the center or the front of this particular flow being about 3/4 of a mile below the source. These shots show the cane going through Iwasaki's cane and crossing some field roads there. This flow was approximately 15 feet thick, with the forerunner fingers being about 1 foot to 2 feet in thickness. Notice the tremendous boulder in the middle, carried along on the surface and then deposited and over. Just before noon on May 26th, the eruption ceased. Since then, steam and sulfur gases have continued to escape from the various vents, but there has been no other volcanic action. During the eruption, lava covered about 3,900 acres to depths ranging from 2 to 200 feet, with an average of 18 feet, consisting of approximately 120 million cubic yards of extruded material. It is estimated that 1,100 acres of cultivated land were covered, of which 700 acres were cane land. Approximately 750 additional acres of cane were burned by fire or volcanic gases.
So that was the USGS video on the sequence of 55 eruption. And to wrap it up, we can share this volcano watch, which is actually 4 years old now, but marked at the time 65 years since 55 eruption. Today we're at 69 years since 55 eruption. So they put out a map which compares the blue is 55 to the red, which is 2018. So 2018 came and covered areas of the 55 flow, like there and there, and in here as well. Yeah, so they do note some comparisons in this article. We've reviewed a lot of the actual sequence here, so let me just come down to the comparisons. So they note that in 55, the eruption lasted 88 days with a brief 6-day pause after the first week. And then an additional 2-week pause occurred in April, and then it resumed for another month with fountains 200 feet high. So Kilauea's lower east rift zone eruption lasted 124 days. It also paused briefly for several days soon after it started, with a longer pause of approximately 2 weeks near the end of the eruption. However, as we mentioned, the lava within Fissure 8 in 2018 was weak and lasted only 5 days after reactivating. Both eruptions opened 24 fissures, but the volume in 2018 was roughly 7 times greater than that erupted in 55. 55 covered, we'll do it in square miles, 6.1 square miles and 6.3 linear miles of road, destroying 21 homes. In 2018, we have 13.7 square miles, so double the area. Right? We have 30 miles of road, 5 times roads buried, and 723 structures compared to 21. A lot more damage as well because it was a lot more developed right there. Subsidence of 1.4 feet in 55 and 1,600 feet in 2018. Right, so there's some of the comparisons and put things in perspective, and that can wrap up our 55 segment here. And of course, there's always more to discuss. We're not meant to be comprehensive here, but to just give you enough of a window to start some discussions about the eruption pattern of the Lower East Rift. 2018, 55, nothing's looking like it's going to happen anytime soon, but someday the time will come again where there will be activity in the Lower East Rift once again. And that's why we do these broadcasts, is to inform people about the processes that hopefully through education we can be better prepared for any disaster in the future make better decisions, have better plans, and recover even faster as well. That's why we do all this, and that's why we thought it was time to revisit 55, since it's been 6 years since before YouTube when we were talking about it there. All right, so I know we're going along here. Let me wrap it up. We do have other volcano watches that were released in the last couple weeks. Last week's release was late, so I will just share it here with you guys. The contributions of Olelo Hawaii to volcanology. There are many Hawaiian words that are used internationally to describe volcanoes, like pahoihoi, like a'a, more landforms, kipuka, right? And beyond that, not quite Olelo, but we do refer to Pele's tears and Pele's hairs as well, and other volcanoes too. So this article is actually written in both English and Hawaiian. Both languages are official for the state. And the article is quite interesting. I won't read through all of it here, but that's basically the appreciation that these names can give to us, right? And something that's also interesting is place names were often descriptive of the processes or the landforms there, right? So the crater of Keanakakoi means the cave in which adzes were made, right? And we actually know since then the adzes have to be made from a very hard rock with no bubbles. Otherwise, it actually breaks, right? So that's the best rock. And therefore, that kind of rock is from intrusions, like dikes, for example. So we know that there was a dike at the bottom of that crater that was being harvested for tools. But we also know a little geology because of that. So that's an interesting consequence of having these really descriptive names. Let's see here. We talk about the elemental forces. Aina is land. Pele Honua Mea, Pele of the Red Earth. Molten lava is still referred to as Pele, although we no longer use English editions such as madam or goddess or deity. It's just Pele. There are lots of Hawaiian proverbs and sayings pertaining to Puna, right? For example, Kawahine ai la'au o Puna, the tree-eating woman of Puna. Description of what's happening down here. Po'ele ka'aina o Puna tells us the land of Puna is blackened by lava flows. So some geologic history embedded in there as well. So, and then more recently, there's been a push by the Board of Geographic Names to correct the names to Hawaiian standards. So Mauna Iki, Mauna Ulu have become one word. I still have my own personal campaign that if that's the case for these mountains, and it's the case for Mauna Kea as well, which we saw during the protests time, then why not Mauna Loa? Right, it's right up the alley. It's just a matter of how it fits into history there as well. But we'll leave that for another day. And places like Kupina'i Pali instead of Waldron's Ledge, and et cetera, are things that are being recovered, right, and put on the park maps and all of that. The caldera, Kalua Pile, as you might have seen us referring to it in the last few years here. So that's Volcano Watch from last week. There is one from this week as well, which is focusing on the satellite imagery of the intrusion and saying it was a textbook example of dike propagation. That means of a lava blade being injected. So this was the image that was captured over the course of one day. There's lots of funny things that happen when you put a blade of lava through a bunch of rock that's all cracked already. And this article explains a lot of that difference, right? So I'll just mention one thing, for example. One thing is that the satellite, let's see if they have it drawn on here. It's not on this one, but usually the satellite's like traveling in a direction, something like this, and it's looking from an angle off the side, something like that. So when all this ground is swelling up, this piece of ground is moving towards the satellite, but this piece of ground over here is moving away from the satellite, right? But not only is there a motion laterally, there's also up and down motion. And so this, because it's moving laterally, but also coming up, is showing a different pattern on the northwest side than on the southeast side, where it looks much more spread out over here. This asymmetry is just a result of that angle of look. And so just one of the little consequences that they go through all of this, little details. One example they mention is that it's complicated. There's outward and upward motion away from the sides, but at the same time, the ground just outside the dike tip is pulled toward the dike, and the ground above is pulled downwards. So not that different from opening a bag of chips by pulling on the sides. As you're pulling the sides outwards, the top and side edge get drawn down and inwards. So there's a lot of crinkling, you might call it, even of the ground there as all of that happens. So that's the last volcano watch that was issued today. And with that, it's time to say some thank yous. Sunday?
Yeah, we got a couple donations that came in. I'd like to acknowledge those real quick. We had Lisa come through with a $20 super chat. Say it's thank you. Appreciate that there, Lisa. And Dennis with a $20 super chat with no comment. Appreciate that there, Dennis. And yeah, we like to also thank everybody that tuned in today. Viewers like you help get this information out there. It helps with the algorithms, the subscriptions, the shares, all of that stuff. And it really does help. So, and if you are so inclined to make a donation, we also take donations on hvery.org/donate, which you can go and make a tax deductible donation there. And I think that really sums us up for the community, really.
Throw in one more thank you. We can thank Hawaii County and HCF and the Puna Strong program as well, who have been supporting us through grants. And we have more coming, but right now that's the one we're running under. So mahalo, you guys.
All right. And thank you, Dano and Carrie, for the ASL interpretation. Welcome back.
All right, so we're going long. Should we wrap it up here? Say our goodbyes?
I think so.
All right, so until next week then, at our regular time, 5 p.m. Hawaiian time, unless something else happens. We'll be back. We'll keep an eye on the volcano as usual. It doesn't look like it's going to do anything this next week, but you never know. And until next week then, from Hawaii Tracker, from HVery, the Hawaiian Volcano Education and Resilience Institute, I am Philip Ong, Dane DuPont, Daniel and Carrie. Mahalo, everybody.